Welcome to Wadsworth History on Film, a program presented by the Wadsworth Area Historical Society and designed to record the oral history for Wadsworth for the future. Our special guest today is Tom Hudson from the Holmesbrook Lumber. You have Holmesbrook Supply to you tonight, or the hardware.
That's correct.
Yeah,
we have the hardware too, but the lumber yard is what we're focusing on today.
We're going to be talking about the lumber company. And as you can see from the picture, Tom is really not old enough to be one of our historians from Wadsworth because he's too young, but we have something which is historical in Wadsworth, and he knows all about it, and that is the 1997 Halloween fire of the Wadsworth Lumber Company. We also had another fire that night, and we're going to try to get the owner of that organization on too later on, but right now we're going to be talking about the Holmesbrook fire, and probably everyone knows about it. So Tom, before we do that, tell us a little bit about yourself. You're not a native, but you married a native.
Absolutely.
And we'd like to hear a little bit about you personally first.
Well, personally.
You're born when and how? And
I'm an Ohio individual, Fremont, Ohio. Moved around a lot. My father was transferred in the business world about every 3 years. And went to college at Heidelberg, undergraduate, and in the field of education.
Right, you were a teacher before you became a lumber person.
I taught for a while. In fact, John Parsons and I became friends when I was a high school principal, and he at that time was also a high school principal. He at Wadsworth, myself at Garfield in Portage County. But I'd always wanted to be in business, but I didn't like this moving every few years. Wanted my family and my kids to really have someone that they could really have count as home and not move. And father-in-law, Tom Cox, had Holmesbrook Supply for years.
Years and years and years.
Yeah, I think it's about 55 years old now. And he had decided that he was going to move and to sell out of the business and start to work his way out. And I said, well, I'd like to give it a try.
Now, Tom had something else that you liked.
Oh yes, well, married his eldest daughter, and we met at Heidelberg. She's a Heidelberg young lady too.
She was in music.
That's correct. And so Ann and I were married in '66. That's a long time ago too. And went to education, spent years there, then had an opportunity to return, and she did to her own community, back to Wadsworth. And I thought, we'll give it a try for a year or two. If we like it, great. If we don't like it, I'll go back to education, still young. And I've just enjoyed the business world, and I enjoy doing anything. As long as you've got your health and you're up and about,
that's right.
Everything's kind of fun. You know, it doesn't make much difference.
I knew you, I did not know you personally when you were principal, but I knew who you were because we had, the University of Akron had approximately 1/3 of its students coming from Portage County.
That's correct.
And at Garfield, which is...
We had student teachers.
That's right, you had our student teachers.
Your student
that's
teachers.
Right, you had our
correct.
student teachers, and they all knew who you were because you were a very young principal. As a matter of fact, you had taught how many years only before you became a principal?
I think I was 28 when I was a high school principal already.
Right, and that's extremely young. You had taught about 3 or 4 years, as I understand, and then you were
started
high school.
in Michigan.
Michigan.
A couple years in Michigan. Came back to Ohio 2 years in the elementary school as a principal, and then went to the high school.
So you, well, how old were you when you became a high school or an elementary principal?
Must have been 23 or 4.
23 or 4. And where was that? At Garfield?
That was at Garfield.
Garfield as well.
Started out in the Garfield schools there.
The education background helped you in a lot of ways, not only intellectually and so forth, but also in dealing with the most difficult of all things, and that is with people's personalities and as well as their money. And you put those two together. You came to Wadsworth and you became very successful as a entrepreneur in the Holmesbrook Lumber Company. There's another member of your family who's with you. Tell us about...
That's correct. Steve.
Steve is your...
younger brother.
Younger brother.
Steve also, I think, has always enjoyed business.
But he was not in teaching, though.
Yes, he was.
Was he really?
He was in teaching at Kentucky. He graduated from Kentucky Wesleyan.
Okay.
Then went into the Air Force and got into finance. And with the Air Force, got his master's degree when he was in Colorado with the Air Force in finance. And Holmesbrook at that time, I could see where we had a possibility for real growth. And I said, well, he was the same, younger than I, but the same type attitude. Hey, we'll give it a try, and we'll go from here and see.
Are you allowed to tell how
And he
old
did that.
you are and how old he is?
I'm about 56 now.
When were you born?
43.
And what about Steve?
He's 48. 1948.
He was born in 48.
He was born 1948, and I was born in the end
And
of
for
43.
posterity, let's tell us what day you were born.
December 24th,
That's pretty close to Christmas.
1943, 11:35 at night. My mother told me very close to Christmas.
Oh boy, just a few more minutes and you would have made it.
That's right.
25 more minutes. Now, who were your mom and dad, and who are your other siblings?
Okay, I have an older brother. We'll start with father. Father's name is Bennett Hudson, still living. In fact, just celebrated his 85th birthday.
God bless him, that's wonderful.
Excellent health yet, so if I'm even close to that at 85, I'll be happy. My mother was Clara Hudson, and she, before that, was an Ebersold, Swiss.
Oh, Eberschultz.
Right, and she has passed away.
Ah.
And then I have an older brother who was an architect, living in Houston, Texas, now retired.
He doesn't buy your lumber then if he's down in Houston.
No, he doesn't buy my lumber. He worked for a small company called Exxon,
Exxon.
and he was an architect for Exxon Oil.
You mean that's little up-and-coming company, Exxon?
They might make it someday if they keep going. See, they've got a long way to go, but they're going to
What is
make
the largest in the world now?
No, now with the merges, I think they're probably down to 3 or 4.
Down to
but
third
they
or fourth.
were.
At the one time, when the
Yeah, that with mobile now, they're back high,
Yeah.
but not quite. And then younger brother, Steve.
Steve.
And we're all 5 years apart.
5 years apart.
And they did that because of college expenses, and they thought back in those years that they were thinking. So they wanted all of us to have a college education,
And you all did.
and we got it, and that way it was easier for them to finance. So we're all 5 years apart.
You know, one of the things, just as a little aside here, Tom, the Sterling Linder Davis parent company, and for the life of me, I can't think of it right this very second, but Polsky's in Akron was part of that. Sterling Linder Davis, I am told, would always hire teachers as department heads because of their twofold ability, the intellectual and their people skills.
I think that's one of the things I really received out of education. And why you go and get your education, you get your degree no matter what, because we know that everybody's going to change jobs probably 3 times in their life today. But I think the moving around as a youngster, growing up, that and in education, meeting people, being in some difficult situations, whether it's with students and student problems or parents or boards or communities, I think really teaches you to adapt.
Well, you certainly did
and make the
do
changes
well
that
with
you
that.
have to do.
Before the end of the program, we're going to find out who your children are and all of that. But right now, we had this wonderful lumber company down there that had just tons and tons of lumber, and I'm one of the frequenters. As a matter
Yes,
of
you
fact, I come there very frequently, and well, I guess that's what frequenters do.
That's why we're still around, right?
They
like
go
that.
down there. And just recently, I've been helping my son with his house in New York, and there are no lumber companies anywhere around. Believe it or not, that's something that really disturbs me, because you can't buy lumber except through a place like home centers or something like that, and don't have that. They try to give the personalized service, and I'm not trying to say anything bad about those people, but the personalized service that you can get, say for instance at Holmesbrook Lumber when you come down. So now today I need a piece that's as straight as an arrow.
You go pick it out,
and
right?
you go pick it out. It's going to be straight as an arrow. And the next day I might come in and say, well, now this one's going to go underground, so I don't have to. So, and it's a kind of a familial thing, and that is something that we all have enjoyed. And I think that you probably have as many family members down there at Holmesbrook Lumber as you do customers, because they have always done that. But someone didn't think that should continue. On the 30th of October, or 31st, which was it? 30th of October, 31st of October of 1997. Tell us where you were on the 31st of October 1997, and what were you doing at 11 o'clock at night?
Actually, 11, I was still sleeping soundly. It was a wonderful evening. I actually had worked at the store that evening of the fire, and about 9 o'clock went home. And typical evening at home, and about 5 to 3 is when I got the phone call saying that there was a fire at Holmesbrook. And I thought, well, it must, there's a fire. I tried to figure out which building it would be, and all those things go through your mind at 5 to 3. And the dispatcher at that time was, who's today, I think, Patrolman Harita. He called and said,
Greg Harita.
Yeah, and he said, it's a pretty big one. So I thought,
wow,
pretty big. I thought, well, it must be the mill, because we have a mill, and that's where the heat is. And maybe the spark or something in the gas. It must be the mill.
Yeah, sawdust and all that.
Absolutely. So went out to get in the car to come into town at about 5 to 3, and I could see the glow in the sky.
Already.
And I live out, so we know on
Road.
Mennonite Road. About a mile down Mennonite, really kind of up on the hill, so you get a nice view of the city. And I had a nice view of the glow. And so I thought, whoa, this is bigger than, it must be big, must be the yard where we've got a lot of lumber. So we rolled into
filled
town.
with lumber, thousands and thousands and thousands of square feet of lumber.
Absolutely, a lot of board feet in there, a
lot
of heat. And so arrived on the scene, and sure enough, it was all our storage buildings to the south. And wasn't there probably either more than a half hour, then Bill Stewart from Wadsworth, sash and door came in. And that's really the first I knew that his building had been on fire. I thought we were the yard on fire. And he came in about probably 4:30, maybe an hour later after I got there, hour and a half, and said, I thought I'd come up and watch another one.
And you didn't know that his was on fire?
No.
Now, tell us
Someone had mentioned that there was another fire in town. But Bill came into the office. Our office up on top in College was untouched. And so we were able to look out the window, and he said, I thought I'd watch one more tonight. He says, I've already seen mine. He says, I can come up and talk to you and watch yours.
Tell us.
So that was the second fire of the night.
Juxtaposition of your building or your lumber yard as compared with his.
Okay, well, if we want to record this in history someday and we have to look down the road, we're probably, a mile and a half? Or maybe not even that. By a straight line, he's directly south of Holmesbrook. We're on College. He's straight south.
Less than a mile, probably.
Probably less. It has to be less than a mile. That's one of the reasons that the arson took place.
Yeah,
It
less
was
than a
easy.
mile.
It was easy for them to get to both.
And almost directly straight south.
Absolutely. And the wind was out of the south.
Out of the south.
Out of the south.
So it was coming north.
All right, that's correct. And therefore, all the smoke from his fire had come across into our area.
And I suspect that anyone seeing that thought that your building being on fire was really his smoke coming onto you.
Absolutely. And we talked about this just minutes before we started to film this, and you learned something. Both the Wadsworth Fire Chief and Copley, who was assisting, because this was a big enough fire after sash and door. Then they had to call more people, of course, because now our building was on fire, and they were scattered, so we had help coming in from everywhere. And both Chief Honert, who came from his home down College and then turned down Grandview to head down to Wadsworth Sash and Door south. Instead of coming into town, he headed south at Grandview, much quicker to get to the fire. And Richard said to myself later after the fire and after the trial even, he said, when I came down to make the turn on Grandview, I noticed there was smoke down in that valley. You know how you've got that little valley down where we dip, right? And he said, but I thought that was smoke settling from sash and door. And then the Copley Fire Chief said that when he came into town, coming now from east to west to make the turn and head down to sash and door, he also said he noticed there was smoke down in the valley. He thought, boy, it's all settling. Well, actually, now that we look back on it, hindsight's 2020, that smoke was we were already generating our own smoke.
You had your own
time.
smoke, yeah.
Absolutely.
What?
So, we were underway.
How many fire departments responded to that fire? I had heard at one time 11. Is that correct?
Oh, I think there was at least 11, maybe more. We had them from everywhere.
Do you remember who they were?
And I know it was the plan. Boy, I wish I would have brought all this. I had all this information, and I should have brought it with me. But they have the different phases as they get help, and I think there might have been 12, and I don't know how many hundred people, actually between the two fires.
Did they have enough water?
It was interesting. They did have enough water. After they all got hooked up and we got running, But I never realized how much water drops in those towers. And they turned the pumps on. And I don't know if you've had Chief Honard on to talk about this or not in the water supply, but he would be a good one, because they kept monitoring by radio how much was in the water tower. And it dropped so many feet fighting his fire. And Dick said, you know, if another one would have taken place, we would have really, we'd stretched about as far as we could go. And you know, they turned the pumps on right away to pump more water up into the tower. And they came from our fire then. They went to the hydrants up on West Street, and they strung hose all the way from the corner of College and West down for our fire.
Wow.
Because the pump right in front of ours, I believe, comes off of another system that takes care of the water. So in order to break free and get another system, they ran the lines up on West Street and strung lines all the way down to our building and just cooled it down. By the time I got there was pretty much not left.
Well, now, the lumber is piled one on top of another.
Oh, sure.
Didn't get much air, but how did it burn so
you know, that's what I thought, and that's what really surprised me, is how you can take basically 2 stories of lumber and come out the next day and have it be about 1.5 feet high. I mean, the biggest pieces we had were like charcoal briquettes.
That was it.
And you know, and you've got heavy lumber in there. At that time we had 6x6, 4x6. You know, plywood stacked real hard on top of each other. No airspace between units of plywood, and they're gone.
Well,
so the heat must have been outstanding. I mean, really intense.
Either that, or someone told me that wood always burns from the top, and maybe it just kept on burning from the top, and the next top was down lower and so forth. I have no idea, but you lost everything then. There was nothing. There was nothing. There was not a board in that house in your place.
Not in the back. It was all. It was gone. And the trucks, you know, being really bright, Halloween, we thought, well, we'll take a couple of the trucks and back them in the sheds at night just to keep them out of the way so there might not be any damage from kids out playing around or soaping windows. So we took 2 of our trucks and put them in there. And of course, they were burnt to crisp too.
I would imagine so.
So we lost 2 trucks too. Besides their, you know, our hindsight, you know, we'd leave the trucks out, but we put the trucks in, and they were loaded with loads ready to go out the next morning, and they didn't go because you couldn't hardly see the trucks. I mean, it just melded them. It was really interesting to see.
What about the
that
crowd? Were there many people coming down and look?
A lot of people.
At 3 o'clock in the morning?
Oh, sure. I mean, 3 o'clock, it was a lot of people. A lot of people taking pictures, cameras, which I told others, which surprised me, when the ATF the next day arrived on the scene.
Now tell us what the ATF, in case 50 years from now they don't
Well,
exist
alcohol,
anymore.
tobacco, and firearms,
right.
Part of the FBI. And the ATF came in. We'd taken a lot of pictures the night before also. And Ann ran those up to Bueller's, had them processed, so she came down with the pictures of all the flames, you know, high, and because by dawn the next morning there was nothing there. I mean, we were down to ashes and smoldering, you know, and smolder for a couple of days.
I would imagine.
But she came down with the pictures, and the fellows from the ATF, probably at 8 o'clock in the morning already, after walking around the rubble, said it was definitely arson. The one fellow said they pretty much knew where it started, and they had some more work to do, but it was definitely arson. And so we were talking upstairs, and Ann came in with the pictures, and we started through the pictures. And he said, "Do you mind if I take your pictures?" And I could care less if he took the pictures. And he sorted out the pictures. And the only pictures he took were pictures of people.
Uh-oh.
He didn't care about the fire. See, now here's another idea of people thinking, see, different than we would.
See?
And because Ann took pictures of the different fire people that we knew, and the people across the street that we knew, you know, the Roars, the Smeltzers, I mean, all the family houses right across, they were all out. And of course, a lot of people had mingled in to watch. So he said, I just want these pictures, and you'll get them back. But I just would like to have them because people that start fires like this, they got to see it. He said, so our person or persons may be in these pictures right now. So he took all the people pictures from me.
Now, out of curiosity, was the
They weren't in ours.
They were not in yours?
No. I don't know if they ended up in any of Session Door, if Bill and if they took many pictures or not. But they weren't in our pictures at that time. After going to the trial and listening to them, they'd returned to Session Door, and then it started to get light, so they couldn't go start another fire. But they really, that night, they wanted to have 3 fires. We found out later at the
They wanted to
trial.
have 3 fires.
They were going to have a 3rd fire, and
Would it be appropriate? Of course, is this?
oh, I think it's, if you're going to talk about it for
Yeah, it's
history, I don't think it
common
makes any
law, yes.
difference. We can throw it. I called them too, and they were surprised. But after the 2nd one, and at this point now they're pretty much sure it might be arson. So working with the police and the fire, their next thought was Doors Incorporated.
Oh my heavens!
Okay, so they sent people out to Doors, the police. And then when we talked with the individuals, it wasn't Doors, it was Heartland Industries.
And tell us where Heartland Industries
Okay,
is.
Heartland Industries down on in State, if you,
Yeah.
you know, not very far from Wadsworth Sash and Door, an easy walk between Sash and Door, Holmesbrook, and back to Heartland. And Heartland Industries builds these storage sheds. So they have a lot of lumber outside and stacked outside too.
They have, as I remember, Heartland has some huge plywood panels, like
Absolutely.
18-footers.
Oh, they have a lot of nice wood. So Heartland had a lot of lumber, and that was, I think, going to be their 3rd fire of the night. That came out at the trial, and but they just didn't get time to get back, so they only had time to get the 2.
Just the 2 of them. That
Just
was
the
it.
2. But
Otherwise,
they
you would
got
have had
us
3
pretty
fires
good.
down there.
Absolutely.
And
We
the
could have had a 3rd.
3rd fire, and probably the one. Now, my understanding is that the fire department had to dip into the match shop pond to help with the one down below.
I think they did that.
They didn't come that far up to you.
No.
It would have been a fair piece of geography there, but they could have been done, I suspect.
They probably could have.
Yeah.
But you know, coming off of the West Street, they were able to get plenty
They
of
were to
water
get that. Now,
down to us.
the details of the fire, something that you said a moment ago about the pictures. How many people would you estimate saw the fire or were there at 3 o'clock in the morning watching that? And how far
Oh,
away do you think
gee.
they might have come from?
On and off, and I'm sure there were 100.
100 of them?
Yeah, you know, at first there were 20 or 30, and then you looked around, the crowd was bigger, and some would go, and some would leave. So
Someone come.
there were a lot of eyewitnesses that night.
The reason that I asked that question is that, and the reason that we're doing this program today is we want to get as much of the memory accurately as we possibly can. I asked that same question about the salt fire way back in 27.
Oh, sure.
And 3 different people had ideas ranging anywhere from 100 people to over 10,000 people.
Well, that's, if we got 10,000, that'd be pretty good, wouldn't it? No,
So,
we'll go to the 100 mark in ours.
The thing that I could never understand with these people, and of course we did not air that because it was not accurate, we didn't think. The reason that that would have been almost an impossibility is we had only 4,000 people in Wadsworth at that time, or 5,000, about 4,000. Not quite 5,000 people in Wadsworth. I think it's 4,900 people. And that meant that at least that many people came from surrounding communities, and of course, you know, transportation wasn't nearly so profuse as it is today. So it probably didn't occur, but somewhere between 100 and 10,000 was probably what watched that. And I was
That
wondering,
gives them a little bit of span.
so a little span, and you say maybe 100 people, between 50 and 100, 30 and 100 people. That
And then, of course, some of them were down at Wadsworth Sash and Door. So see, they had
course.
2 fires to
Yeah,
do
they
that
had
night. They didn't get one. They were able to get to both.
Yeah.
And some had been to both. Some of the people I talked to said, well, you know, we've been down to Sash and Door, and we're describing that fire, and then watched ours, and then we're going back and forth. So,
What about the incendiary device? Did they just put a match to it? Of course, you know, lumber can burn easily, but how do they start it?
well, they used some propellant spray type, and they left one of those behind.
Oh, really?
Oh yes, and that I think, Caesar. You know, when I talked to the people at ATF then the next day, and of course the state fire marshal, they had people up here, and the fellow from the Federal Bureau of the ATF, I asked him. I said, you know, you think there's really a snowball's chance? Because I've heard that arson it's really tough unless you've got everything in your facts right, and you have an eyewitness almost. It's really tough to pin arson down. And his comment to me already by 9 o'clock in the morning was, yeah, kids, young. He says, and we'll get them, he said, because they're going to be from Wadsworth. He said that the real difficult fires, to find arsonists are like professionals that maybe would have used some other way to start the fire. I won't tell you those ways, but he told me a lot of different ways. And they're already back in Chicago. He said, those are the hard ones to find. Those are the professionals. He said, I can tell you right now, after walking around the fire, seeing the fire, talking to just different individuals standing around, that we've got basically kids. Well, in this case, they weren't kids. They might have acted like it that night and thought they were 19 and 21 or 18 and 19. I mean, they weren't 15, 16-year-olds. So he was really quite confident at 9 o'clock in the morning that it would be found. But to the question on how it started, of course, they'd stop at Session Door first, and that started with gasoline. And
now what time
Bill
did that
can tell you
start?
about
Session
that
Door
one.
start?
I don't know. I think Bill's did start somewhere closer to midnight. But they picked up gasoline there and started it with gasoline up the side of an old building. They took some starter fluid, like you would start a truck with or a car. You know, that stuff is pretty powerful.
Kind of ether or something like that? Mm-hmm.
And they tried to start the fire, and the first time it didn't work very well. It failed. And it was in the very back of our shed, the south end. Now, I don't think at that time they were coherent enough, because they would tell you that they had been drinking. Coherent enough to know that that was a great place to start it with the wind, blowing from south to north. But in our building, in the layout, the south is the most advantageous place to hide out. I mean, it's dark back there, you're out of the way, and it's not where there's much traffic. So they went to that area of the building, in which we have a lot of molding, thin pine pieces, burn great once you get them going. So the first time it didn't start very well, and it smoldered. So the one took his shirt off, and they sprayed the propellant and whatever on that, stuffed it back under, and lit it, and that time they had a fire. They left the south end of the building then, because it was starting, and they came up to start behind our building, which is the mill. There's a mill there, and they were going to start that building on fire. It's separate. For history's sake, at that time we had 3 different buildings. We had the little retail sales up on College, we had a big main lumber shed, and then we had this mill and another storage shed next to it, and they're all 3 separate. And so they had the biggest building on fire, so they came over to get the second building on fire. Evidently, they ran out of propellant. There was some smoldering back there. We found some smoldering the next day, and they left one of their propellant cans behind, one of their starter fluid cans. So the ATF picked that one up gingerly and put that away as evidence by 9 o'clock in the morning. So they were pretty much sure that it was kids and they would find that situation. So
And it
that's
was
how
indeed
started.
kids then?
Oh, yes.
And
they had planned it a couple weeks before. They wanted to have a big fire on Halloween,
a big fire on Halloween?
and they had it. They had 2 big fires
Wow,
on Halloween.
wow. Did they go to trial?
Oh, yes.
So whatever you tell us here now is historically sound,
Oh,
and
absolutely. And they can go. It's all recorded.
it's all recorded. So
I
you can
I
tell
won't
us
be
names
giving
and everything else. right?
Any more great news.
Well, what about the trial? How about that trial?
Well, the trial was interesting. Of course, I testified. Bill Stewart had to testify. The one young person had admitted it. You know what that sound is? I bet that's on our tape, too. I think that's the Goodyear blimp, the new one.
Is that the new
Doesn't
Goodyear
it sound
blimp?
like it might be
Yes,
out there
it is.
working?
Mhm.
After that historical
Yeah.
event, we just had the new,
Yes, right.
new Goodyear blimp.
Yes, if you hear
But it sounds like it might be.
the motor, that's probably the Goodyear blimp, the new one.
Out cruising Wadsworth. So at the trial, and the police did we talked about it, and they were, throughout the whole, from the fire to the time that the arrests were made, they would check in and talk with us, tell us how they were coming. They were narrowing things down, and they said they would do us a favor. They said, we'll tell you a couple hours in advance. I asked them before it became note and press worthy that they'd arrested someone or actually made arrests. So one morning, it was a Saturday morning, probably 7:15, 7:30 in the morning. They called up and they said they had 2 individuals that were currently being detained, and they were going to arrest and get a court hearing set, that they had the 2 individuals, and they were quite positive that those were the 2 individuals, so they wouldn't go this far. And if I wanted to come down before they released it to the press, stop down. So at that time, myself and my brother Steve and Tom Cox, former owner of the lumberyard, went down. I didn't know either individual.
To the police station?
Didn't know either individual. But the one had pretty much given it out, and then they went to the other home at 2 in the morning and said, you know, well, your friend has said that you were involved, and then he spilled everything, and it was pretty much at that time they had both let go. So I finally went to court with the situation, listened to them, you know, how they did it, how they started it. They went through the whole thing in detail. I'm sure hindsight is 20/20, and if they had to do it again, they certainly wouldn't do it again.
No, I'm sure they wouldn't.
I think the one young fellow got 10 years in jail, and the other 11, and I think chances for parole like at 5 years. So they're still not, you know, 2 years later now, and a little more, and they've still got at least 3 to go to parole. So that's a tough thing, because their parents, of course, are still Wadsworth people.
And I'm sure
and
those
it makes it
parents are
difficult.
just heartbroken.
Oh, they were.
Heartbroken.
You know, they really were. They at the trial, I went over and talked to the one mother, introduced myself, and she said, you know, I'm just so sorry. What can I say? And I said, well, you know, not much. I said, I feel more sorry for you.
Yeah, I do
said,
feel.
you know,
I feel very sorry for
I
the
can
parents.
rebuild, and I will rebuild. But I said, you know, this has happened now to a son, and he's gone. That's the tough situation.
Yeah, that
I said,
is.
Mine we can go, but yours is going to be a lot harder to work from.
Yeah, that'll be with her, and I feel so bad for her. I don't even know her, but that doesn't make any difference. We always feel bad for those people. Tell us a little bit about the rebuilding process, and what did you do then? Did you stop selling lumber? Did you continue? What did you do?
We tried to continue as best we could.
Well, where did you get your lumber?
Well, in today's world with trucks, it's pretty quick to
That's
get
pretty
lumber.
quick.
You know, we lost everything out in back, which, you know, was probably 80% of all the lumber we had. So as far as making deliveries from there, we were in trouble. We had two problems at that time. One, we wanted to continue to deliver as best we can. We got to stay in business. And 2, we got to clean it up. So we had to wait a couple of days, and there we really got a break at Holmesbrook Lumber because we were allowed to clear ours off in a couple of days. Bill Stewart had to wait a little longer.
Why is that?
I don't know. I don't know if they didn't get the detail they wanted out of that yard or whatever, but when ours, because I know they took dogs down to his yard too, as far as trying to find out how it started, and it didn't start. And I asked them at the ATF, because they called me up and asked questions like, what are the wattage of the light bulbs in that building? And they're 300 watt. And I told him it's 300 watt, but the lights were off. He said, well, you don't understand, Tom. He said, you may know a little bit about lumber, but I'm trying to prove that even if the lights were on, that it couldn't have been a light bulb or faulty wiring that started that fire. I have to prove it was definitely arson. So I have to rule out all the possibilities. So he said, what were those bulbs? I said, they were 300 watts. And he said, well, they only burn with a heat of so many degrees. And he went through and ruled out everything. So after 2 days, he was done with us. And I asked him, I said, eyewitnesses, like your eyewitnesses, you know, you get 10,000 people at that fire, and we know that couldn't have happened. One of our eyewitnesses told us that the fire started up, and he saw it by the front of our building, and he saw a flame shoot directly from the front of our building, which would be north, right along the peak of the roof to the south. And I asked the fellow there from the ATF, and he said, well, he said, people see a lot of things. He said, that's impossible. And he said, someday, Tom, I will tell you and Steve how the fire started, where it started, how quickly it moved, but I don't want to tell you any of that right now, because we may be in court. And he says, and I will be in court, and they will use some of my thoughts and knowledge, and you and I can't even talk about these things.
No kidding.
Because it looked like we built a case against an individual, absolutely. So he said, someday I'll tell you how it started, where it started, how it spread, and what.
Did they ever tell you?
Oh, certainly. And it went back to the propellants at the south end. But they had all that with us in 2 days. So where they didn't with Bill's building. So that's why at the end of 2 days, we were able to start to clean up. You know, we drug the trucks out,
They're actually completely burned?
Oh yeah, they were gone. There's nothing
left of them.
Great pictures. I should have brought some, because with today's pictures you could have seen it. Maybe I'll bring them up if you get Bill Stewart or you get the chief and you can throw them in somewhere. But it just melted. The trucks were gone. You know, like on the rims, the only thing were with the steel belted tires, there were like rolls of steel around the rims. The rubber all melted and gone. The one had a fiberglass cab. So you know what happened to that? It was just kind of melted. Looked like a candle had melted, and the beds were all warped, and there was nothing left. So we drug those out with chains and hauled them out of there. They were gone. So we were able to we got a break. We were able to start cleaning up in about 2 days. It takes a little while to clean up that much lumber. It took longer than I thought.
Imagine so.
You know, just bulldozer after bulldozer. But again, being, I think, small, little lumberyard, we got a lot of help from a lot of people and a lot of businesses. Rulon Construction, for instance, just up in Sharon Center. We've known and worked with Rulon on and off for years. And Rulon sent a bulldozer down to use to help, and a driver if we needed it, to help load these trucks to get it cleaned up quicker. Then they sent down 2 trucks, just the trailers, to just set to help us store stuff in that can't get wet. So Rulon brought 2 trucks down, parked them wherever we wanted to park them, and said, you know, when you get done with them, call us, we'll come and pick them up. So we had a lot of help in that way. But people like Georgia Pacific, Weyerhaeuser, I mean, these people, you know, all their trucks are haul lumber daily. So, you know, we called those people, and, you know, we had lumber back in the yard almost, you know, the next day or 2 right away. We were able to, and that was tough. It was makeshift. It was setting here, there, and everywhere. But we tried to go on because we know that the longer you're out of business, the more customers you lose too.
Absolutely.
Because these people have got to go somewhere and buy lumber. You know, where's their lumber delivery? Well, it's going to be a while. So we try to get back. We had a company in Medina called Welco. They sell lumber to us. They had extra truck that they only use now and then. It's for deliveries, a dump truck. And they called up and they said, "Hey, we'll have a truck down to you later today." A company in Akron. Oh boy, what's his name? See, this is why after 2 years, we should have done this. But Kenmore Lumber.
Kenmore Lumber.
Kenmore, they had a fire years and years ago. He said, when I was a little boy, he wasn't a little boy anymore, and he said, I know what it's like in going through. He said, I'm sending your truck over, use it. When you're done with it, bring it back. So Kenmore sent a truck over. So we were able to make deliveries as quickly as we could, not back to anything close to what we should be, because you'd be surprised how many different types of materials there are, and you don't realize until it is all gone.
Yeah, it's like water.
Absolutely, and then you say, oh shoot, we don't have those. They burned up. A person would call up or come in to buy something, and then all of a sudden, well, do we have any or don't we have any? No, they were in the shed. So we sorted it out, but we tried to get back as quickly as we could. We got a lot of help from people in the business that realized what we were going through, and then we got a rebuild.
What about the community?
Oh, I think the community was really supportive. A lot of the community people, the builders were too. They said, hey, if it takes a day or 2 longer to get it out here, that's fine. Most of them were, more than considerate that way. We had people come down and want to know if they could help. They couldn't help. Some of them probably would have come in with shovels to help, but from an insurance standpoint, they were told to stay off the area, and it was all roped off and whatever. But I think the community, really stood behind us as best they could with what they could do. There's not a lot they could do.
I had some conversations with some of the fire people, and there's a human element in all of what belongs to Wadsworth. One of them said it so succinctly. He said, I was absolutely drained of all strength while I was putting out the fire down at Bill Stewart's at the Wadsworth Station door. And the second that I heard that there was a fire at Holmesbrook, all of my strength came back, adrenaline I'm sure, and I came up there. So the only thing that I felt the following morning was not a muscle ache, but a heartache. And I thought that was a nice way of putting it, because that was, it's an institution. It's part of it belongs to all of us. Concerning the trial, maybe you can't tell us this, or maybe if you can, who would have taken the part of these people who had already confessed to doing it? I mean, or was it just a quick in and out trial?
Well, they had an appointment. It lasted, several days because there were different witnesses. The thing I thought, Caesar, that really surprised me when I got to the trial and found out more information beforehand is that one of the fellows that started the fire was identified within 20 minutes of the fire.
Oh, really?
And I was really surprised with that information, and a lot of things came to light.
How did that happen?
It's interesting. The Akron Beacon-Journal has an individual who works through the nights, and his job, at least this is the way he described it to myself and to the jury, is to go out in the small communities which he was assigned, of which Doylestown, Rittman, Wadsworth, I think Norton, there might have been a fifth, might have been Lodi, to look for things that may be stories that they should follow up on the next day. And he basically worked, he said, from midnight to 6 in the morning. And that was part of his job to drive around. Well, the fire had started at Syshendor and he was there. And then he left Syshendor and was coming up, those familiar with Wadsworth, he was coming up Grandview. And then at Grandview he turned east on College and was coming down the valley there before you start up the hill back into the city. And he looked and he saw a flash, a bright flash down in the yard. And he thought, that's hard to believe. So he backed the car up and he looked down, and sure enough, there was a fire at Holmesbrook. So he said he was at the top of the hill. He started down just a little bit down the hill, and he saw an individual. And at that point got back in his car, drove up to the police station and said, hey, I just want to tell you, in case anybody hasn't reported it, the lumberyard's on fire also. And I saw an individual there. So at that time, the police said, do you think you could identify this person? Were you that close? And he said, yes, I was that close. And he said, and the fire was bright enough that I got a good look at his face.
I'll be darned.
So, and see, this is new to me now, because for months I'm wondering, do they even have a suspect for this fire? And they keep telling us to be patient, everything will work itself out. So at that time, the police now have told us that, and they did at the trial, they laid, I think they said it was either 8 or 12 photos out on the desk and said, would that individual be any one of those people? And the fellow from the Beacon-Journal picked that individual's photo out.
And was that indeed the one who did it?
And that was him, and handed it to him and said, that's the individual I saw. So that very night, within an hour of the fire's beginning, they had a real suspect.
Oh, boy.
2 days later, the other individual's name came to the surface as a top suspect. And again, this was all brought out at the trial, because I was surprised when the first person that the prosecutors called to the witness chair was the individual from the Beacon-Journal, and he gave him this information. And then the second individual was a young lady who was a friend at this time of those two individuals, and I guess it just really worked on her and got on her conscience, and she turned the name in of the other individual 2 days later and said that she'd heard them boasting about, was a pretty hot Halloween in Wadsworth, wasn't it? And that she listened further and further and realized that he was involved, though those two were involved. So she brought the names in too. So at that point, they had their two suspects. And of course they had others, and they had so many different people call in with this ID and that ID and who it might be. But really they had those two right away.
Yeah, the Wadsworth police had that.
Absolutely, and it took them some time to really get all their facts in order. And they questioned those individuals. Yeah, and they both didn't know anything about it.
In this litigious society, they have to be so absolutely careful of everything that they do.
Absolutely.
So they couldn't do that. We're going to get back to the fire in a second, but I don't want to wage a war within your own family by not asking the next question first, and then we'll come back to that. Tell us about your family, your children, and so forth, because
Oh,
If
wow.
if people forget, then they have to come back and say, we know, I went home, my daughter didn't hear her name mentioned. So
Oh, well, my daughter's in Columbus. They probably won't see this anyway. 2 daughters, both through Wadsworth schools. Sarah is the eldest, and Sarah, upon graduating from Wadsworth, went to Capital School and went through nursing, and she's an RN and works for the city of Columbus. And the other daughter, Julie, also graduated Wadsworth, went to Purdue, and then transferred from Purdue because it was, she thought, too large a school, to a small school in Florida called Stetson.
Stetson, yes, I know it very well.
And there are some other people in Wadsworth that have graduated from
My
Stetson.
wife's best
which I
friend
was
went to
surprised.
Stetson.
Okay.
And she was, well, she's now 60 years old, as my wife is. But she was an airline stewardess all of her life from Stetson.
Okay.
Stetson is an exclusive college.
It's a nice private school. She picked it out and was able to get a scholarship to help herself and ended up transferring to Stetson. But Gary Bernard, eye doctor, I think his brother, one of Gary's brothers, went to Stetson too. So, so I'd never heard of it until really that my daughter went there.
Very fine
So
school.
she's graduated. She's in social work and works now for a company that assigns and works people to work with physically disadvantaged individuals.
And
they
what about-
both enjoy it.
Married, both of them?
Eldest is married.
Grandchildren?
Yeah, not yet.
Not
Just
yet.
been married a little over a year.
Okay, fine.
So they're
And
both
what about
doing
Tom? Let's get Tom's in here too.
Oh, Tom is as healthy as ever. We probably should have brought Tom along today, but he's probably having one of his meetings at the downtown roundtable with everybody figuring out what the mayor ought to do.
That's what the mayor ought to do, right. That's right, exactly.
Because they can handle all the situations.
Yes, as a matter of fact, Louis Graff, whom we all know and love with a tremendous amount of affection, said, now, if you want to know what to do, just come down there, we'll tell you.
Absolutely. I'm surprised they haven't got a chair for the mayor there in their morning meetings. But his health is great, and still in Wadsworth, and will always be in Wadsworth. And you'll never find Tom retiring to Florida or to Arizona or whatever. He's Wadsworth through and through, and
Every single bit,
he'll be here forever, and Wadsworth still his main concern.
Tom is my wife's ideal for a mayor. She worked with him for all the years.
And he was a mayor, so as the mayor now,
And she always holds it up to me. She says, well, now, I'm going to judge your ability as a mayor with Tom Cox, because all the years that I was there, he never once left the office. And I want you to spend that much time in the office. So I have a big shoes to fill.
Well, you're going to be in trouble then, because you're going to have a lot of time to put in.
A lot of time to put in. Well, I'm putting in quite a few hours now, but I still haven't reached Tom. How about Steve? Tell us about Steve and his family.
Well, Steve is, let's see, he has 3 children. 2 are on the east. Young Stephen, I will start with the youngest. Young Stephen is just finished up at the University of Akron, and has had some real runs with cancer.
Yeah, I know.
And
how is he now? In pretty good shape?
At this point, he's good shape. He's been given a clean bill, but every 6 months, you always wonder.
Yeah, surely.
But he had some real cancer problems ever since he was 16, and did a lot of work this past summer. Went and did some really severe, where they did stem cells and whatever, and chemo over in New York City. But he's back from that. He's healthy again. He's getting ready. He wants to start working on his master's. So that's a good sign.
Good for him.
Andrea is a daughter. Andrea is still not married. Andrea is working on Wall Street.
Wall Street.
She's in Wall Street with one of the companies.
Now,
in
have
Wall
you been
Street.
to Wall Street?
Yes, I have.
The cruddiest looking street I've ever seen in my life. There's not a street anywhere in Wadsworth that could be so cruddy.
I know that, but at the end of Wall Street, they've got a nice little cemetery. They're very close with
Yes,
some historical people there. There were some good names at the end of Wall Street, but I know they play it up pretty good, but we wouldn't be proud of it, would we, in our
absolutely.
community?
We wouldn't do it here.
And then he has the oldest daughter lives in New Jersey and has 2 children.
Now, he's a grandfather then.
He is a grandfather.
Let's name those 2 children so that we have those on for
Well,
posterity.
we've got Tyler
Tyler,
and Samantha.
Samantha.
She just celebrated her 1st birthday.
Okay.
So I think we've got most of the names. Cheryl, previous wife, now divorced. And Cheryl lived, in the community with Steve. Now we've been here for 20-some years. And she now lives and resides in Las Vegas. And Steve still lives in residence on West Street.
On West
The old Bixler house.
The old Bixler. Oh, really?
The
On the old
absolutely,
Bixler house.
the old Bixler house.
Yes, that's a historical
That
spot.
was built when there was the gravel road up there.
That's right. As a matter of fact, West Street used to go just about to the end of 146 or 8 or something like that. The rest of it was nothing more than dirt, and I remember that very, very specifically. You couldn't go through on West Street.
And that's when Bixler built way out in the country there.
That's right.
So
He was out in the country. You're
he
right.
was out in the
He was way
country.
out in the
Today
country.
it's surrounded him.
Tell us, go back to that. Now, anybody else be forgotten there? Because I don't want you to get
From a historical
beaten.
standpoint,
No,
let
I'm,
me
I'm
think.
talking in terms of your family, because I don't want you to get beaten up when you go home. That you
Oh,
forgot somebody.
I think we've got it.
You got them all. Okay, good.
I think we've got that covered, see.
You got that covered. Let's go back to the fires then, just for
Okay.
we have a few more minutes here, and I want to go back to the genesis of the fire. The little human interest things. You are awakened at 5 minutes to 3 in the morning. Now, when the telephone rings at 3 o'clock in the morning, it is never good news.
Absolutely.
Never
It's
good news.
it's either
And you
the
know.
kids or something, right?
Right.
There's a problem, an accident.
And-
Everybody has that thought.
Just out of curiosity, at that time your kids were probably at college, right? Okay.
Or one was out, one was still in. Correct.
When you heard who was the dispatcher called you?
That's correct.
Yeah, the dispatcher said, Tom, Holmesbrook is on fire. Tell us what your thought was, and let's see if I can guess it. Well, is that all? My kids are okay.
That's true, because I didn't think it could be that big. Even when he said it's a big fire, he said, Tom, it's big, and I said, well, I'll head down right now, and he said, I'll call your brother, because my first thought was I'm going to call Steve. I said, I'll call Steve. He said, no, he said, I'll call your brother as soon as I hang up. In fact, when I got there, he pulled in right away. But it's interesting. You talk about a community now. Here's your smallness.
Yeah, they knew that you had a brother, knew where to live.
But my daughter called at 5 in the morning from Stetson, which is in Florida.
Yeah.
And that's down there a piece. And she called the house at 5. Couldn't get through, so the phone rang at the store. And it was she had called saying that I hear Holmesbrook is burning.
How'd she hear?
And again, see, this is your small community. A friend from high school saw it and knew that she was at Stetson, so she made the call to Stetson. And my other dog called, that way. I mean, it just doesn't take long. And everybody knew.
Everyone knew.
Because my elder daughter, Sarah, knew right away before 6 in the morning, and Julie called the store before 6 in the morning saying, I understand there's a fire. I said, how do you know yet? Because at that point, I still hadn't even called Tom Cox.
Oh, Tom didn't know.
He didn't know at that point. At that point, I don't think he'd been told.
No
because
kidding.
I thought, let him sleep. What's he going to do now? Except come and watch the flames too.
What did he say when you finally told him?
I told him that there was a fire, and he said he was going to come down. I said, well, it's pretty bad, so prepare yourself. I said, there's not much left. And of course, he appeared on the scene. And again, it was just tough for him because he'd seen it start from nothing.
Oh, yes.
And grow the yard too. And all of a sudden, when he comes onto the scene, there's everything is gone also. So it was a tough thing for himself too, because he'd been in that business for many, many years.
That's all he's ever done, really.
That's correct.
I mean, yeah, he's done some other things as a young man, but that's pretty well all he's done. The other, the human interest part of it, Ann is a very steady person, your wife is a very steady person. Knowing fully well that this was a livelihood and so forth, she also, I'm sure, could be emotional about this. What was her response to the fire? I mean, the immediate response was, oh my heavens, but what?
Well, I think probably, that we can go on. She's so organized
Oh,
that,
yeah.
what's the next step now from here? I think that she was probably more worried,
About how you took it.
mentally. Her comment was, as some other people, well, how are you taking this?
Yeah.
You seem to be doing fine. I said, well, hey, nobody got hurt. We can go from here. It's a real setback, and we're still not caught up to where we probably should be.
Well,
But and her thought, I'm sure, was pretty much the same thing. Boy, this is a disaster. But
yeah, just out of curiosity.
we want to keep all the employees working. That was the first thought too. Is what do they do when they show up in the morning? Because a lot of them didn't have any idea. And they pulled up and they can't even get to the store. We still had fire trucks and hoses, and at 7:30 in the morning, it was still pretty good
bad,
smoke.
yeah.
And their first thought, what are we going to do now? Because we're trying to make a living here too.
Well, surely.
And am I going to get a check next week, or am I not going to get a check next week?
You bet. And you had the same thing down at Bill Stewart's. I mean,
that's correct.
And he had several people there. I mean, he had about 30 or 40 people working for him.
Sure.
And you have what, 15?
We probably had at that time. Well, we probably got 30 with all the stores, but we probably had 8 or 9 that were really, affected right away. But we didn't lay off anybody. We didn't change. Financially, it was a hardship, but hey, these people have been with you, and they're the ones that helped us rebuild it. It was just a year or two before this, I think, C's, that we got the Rosie Award for an outstanding business in Wadsworth.
And Wadsworth,
well, those are the same people that made us, get to achieve of that award.
You bet.
So I mean, we stayed with them no matter what, and they're still with us.
The other person I'd like to know about is, what was Tom's reaction, and how did he, because he is a completely different person from you.
Absolutely.
But how did he react?
I think he was much more devastated.
Devastated.
And I mean, I was just, oh my gosh, how could it happen? What are we, and how will we ever get this back? I mean, what are we going to do? And he was, but I think then, he's an intelligent individual. Once he realized that, here's the steps we've got to follow.
And you have to go that direction.
We've contacted everybody, and he just couldn't believe anybody would do that.
Yeah, unless we've changed some rules.
Especially it was for arson, what's got him, because he still has so much faith, I think, in the youth. And so do I as a teacher. You hear about all the negatives, but we've got so many good students that our school system's unbelievable.
Yeah,
and we hear the negatives. And Tom was just, I think, crushed, that when I told him, I said, well, it's arson. And he said, are you sure? I said, hey, they didn't put that sign out on the wall there. The state puts this one up, State Fire Marshal, $5,000 reward for any information. And the ATF didn't tell us at 9 o'clock in the morning, it's arson. I said, it's arson. He says,
arson.
how would kids do that? Why would anybody want to do that? That's his going back to the thought, yes. Couldn't be so, but it was.
One other group, and then we have to call our quits because we've come to the end of the hour. The people at the hardware store, what was their response at Holmesbrook Hardware?
Well, yeah.
They weren't involved, obviously, but...
That's correct, at the Ace Hardware.
Or Ace Hardware.
Well, it's Holmesbrook Ace. It's the same thing. It's our Ace store here in town. They didn't know what was going to happen either, because they know that's we're all part of the same thing.
That's right.
And it's one company. We've got 3 stores. We've got one hardware in Rittman, we've got the hardware in Wadsworth, and we've got the lumberyard. So we're really all together, and we work together. And they were the same way. Where do we go from here?
So
and we go on. Let's go. We've got a good hardware. Let's keep this going, and we'll get the lumberyard back.
And a quickie on the rebuilding.
Okay.
How did you do it?
That was probably the most difficult thing. Because rebuilding the building, we had to meet a lot of the newer codes.
Yes.
And local architect, we grabbed Mike Venya down there to draw up a plan for new sheds. And we sit on a creek there, a little creek that comes through there. But because we sat so close to the line, we had to have a firewall there.
Yep.
Even though nobody can build close, and there's nothing. So that took more time. We had to redesign them with a firewall, and the costs and whatever were, start to escalate then. But if we have a fire there again, I think that wall ought to still be standing.
Well,
maybe.
we hope you never have another fire.
Well,
we've come to the end of the hour. We want to thank you for sharing this with us, and if we possibly can, we need to have you again to say a great deal about not only the lumber yard, but also about the fact that you have been able to rebuild and how you did the rebuilding, and maybe we can have you back when we have Bill on with Wadsworth Session Door. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Really
I appreciate
it.
We should have got together earlier. It would have been easier to remember, right?
That's right. That's why we're doing it now.
Thank you for having us.
Right.